Hi, this is Ken Jarecke, and we're talking pictures with Paul Bellinger. We're going to review some things. Paul's going to ask some questions. Hopefully, he'll get some good answers out of me. Hey, Paul.
Hey Ken, how's it going?
It's going well. What are you
It's
up
only been
to?
a few days.
Yeah.
I feel like we were just here a couple days ago.
Well, we got a lot of ground to cover.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, real quick at the beginning, just to give a little current events update, Iran struck back on our bases. They hit shot some missiles. Looks like that might be the end of the conflict as far as right at the moment. What are you thinking now? You've had like a few days. The wheels have turned a little bit. If you were an editor at a magazine, what would you be doing? What would you be sending your photographer? What would you tell the current photojournalists that are out there right now trying to cover this story? What should they be doing?
Well, I mean, my first thought last night was that the religious leaders and political leaders in Iran, their biggest prayers last night was that they didn't hit anything. They knew darn well that if they did hit something, if they did manage to wound or kill an American service person, that they would, there'd be retaliation. So they had to strike to, they've got their client states, their client non-government entities that are out and about to their financing and are doing their
Yeah, like
business.
like Hezbollah.
Right. So they have to show a little bit of strength, but they don't want this to escalate. We don't, the United States doesn't want this to escalate. Iran doesn't want this to escalate, but they do want to save a bit of face with their own people who are um, kind of on the verge of looking for regime change themselves. And so they had to do something, but they didn't want to do anything that could give the United States an excuse to do something more. So this was a win-win. Everybody's happy. We'll go back to business as usual at this point.
So if you're a photojournalist out there, or if you're an editor telling people what to do, where to go, you're thinking what, like come back to Washington, shoot the upcoming Senate impeachment trial, or what would you focus on?
If I was an editor at a magazine right now, I would, there was a bunch of the president got a lot of heat uh, about listing historical sites on his target list, or his made up target list for Iran. And I would go to Palmyra, which is an ancient city in Syria, which ISIS and with the support of Iran, they kind of had their headquarters there, and that's a UN historical site. It's a really valuable site as far as historical reasons go. And I'd send a photographer there just because I haven't seen anything out of there since ISIS has been driven out of Syria. And I would just like to see how that place was changed, as a historical site, or if it was changed at all, and how the people. I'm wondering how the people who lived there made a living off of the tourism. I wonder how they're getting around now and how that's doing. That would be an interesting story for me. So it
Yeah,
has
that's a
really
great idea.
has nothing to really. It's a kind of. It's just it has not a whole lot of connection to the current situation, but it does as well.
Yeah,
So
it totally does. No, that's a great idea. And that's something that you could actually see. There's been a lot of changes in that area. It's probably since it was last photographed. So it's useful for that purpose alone. But on top of that, being a historical site and all of that, that's a great idea. Probably looking at all 52 of those places would be a good starting place if you're wanting to do a tour of the Mid East.
well, yeah, well, Palmyra's in Syria, and those other sites are in Iran, um, and that would be an interesting long-term project to go to those sites and see exactly what's there, and kind of document the value of those sites.
Yeah, yeah, cool. All right, that's a great idea. So, all right, moving on. I want to get into the podcast that you had with Rick Smolin. We've talked about it a few times. I think it's my favorite podcast so far. Probably, if I had to pick one, of course, there's gold nuggets in every single one of these, but just the storytelling that Rick Smolin has, and just his story. I mean, right from the very beginning, as soon as he starts talking and telling about how he got into photography, how he got into contact press images. I mean, he just happens to see David Burnett. Burnett, and he had just been turned away from looking, trying to show his portfolio somewhere. And he sees David Burnett. Burnett likes the pictures. It says, you can go do our grunt work that none of the other photographers want to do. So, of course, he takes on that job. The first job he gets from them is to fly on this first nonstop flight to Tokyo from the US. And he thinks he's going to go fly over there, be gone 2-3 days, come right back. And he ends up not coming back for 11 months, getting assignments, picking up assignments, and going all over Asia and all that kind of thing. So I just wanted to ask you, I mean, do you have any, is that a common trend that you see amongst photographers? I know Joe McNally kind of talked about a similar time when he went to go shoot Peter Jennings and ended up shooting the Pope, and staying over in Europe for a while. What do you have any stories like that where you were shipped off somewhere and then you ended up thinking you're going to be back in a week, and then next thing you know, it's 6 months later and you're not back?
Well, as a photographer, Rick and Joe, they're both great visual storytellers, but they're also um, oral story. They can tell a great story, and
Yeah.
so Rick, when you think about Rick's story and the stories he shared, I had heard a lot of those stories. I heard a lot. I mean, these are friends, so you hear these stories, and they're very good at telling them. And Rick is a guy who you just sit down and talk to for hours, just because he has such a rich life experience, and he's so good at sharing these moments and this knowledge that he has. So um, that's that's one of the reasons why they're so fascinating to listen to guys like Rick. As far as his story, uh, becoming a member contributing photographer at Contact Press Images, that's actually pretty typical. I don't know that there's any contact press image photographer who has ever been involved in the agency that it hasn't just been a very kind of organic, open-ended type of almost happenstance relationship. That's how Contact has always operated. If you look at Magnum, there's a nomination process, and then there's a probationary year. You're kind of there
Yeah.
as a temporary member. And then everybody votes, and it has to be unanimous. Everybody has to vote to let you in. With Contact, it was never like that. With Contact, basically everybody that showed interest got a shot, and it was amazing, the people that went through there and had a shot. And some of them took advantage of it, some of them didn't. Some of them would stick around for a couple of years. Some of them, like me, you know 30 years later, we're still there. The thing with Contact, there's no paperwork involved. I mean, it's not like you sign a contract with Contact Press Images. Everything's an oral agreement. That's how the business used to run in general anyways. It was all
Mm.
handshake agreements.
That's a
And
perfect point, because a lot of those trips that we're talking about were handshake or over the phone agreements. Oh, you're in Europe shooting Peter Jennings. Oh, we'll give you, go shoot the Pope, or we'll cover your hotel. Whatever, is all handshake and oral agreements.
yeah, I mean, it's always kind of just um usually it was over the phone. Sometimes there's a fax or a telex even involved, but uh and if it's something like Rick was doing, he was just going from story to story. A lot of those are assignments. Um, all the agencies, all the French style agencies, and Magnum included, if you were in Tokyo and something was happening, it wasn't, you didn't wait for an assignment. You went out and started working on, if it was something that interested you, you'd start working on that without an assignment. The assignment, and there were hundreds of assignments available. There were hundreds of magazines. Those would come along. Those you
Hmm.
could count on those assignments to come along. And even if an assignment didn't come along, you could count on your agency, licensing an image here and there that would make it all worthwhile. So if you know if the president was visiting Japan and you were there, you wouldn't wait for an assignment from, say, Time Magazine or Life Magazine. You just start working as an independent journalist with Magnum, with Contact, with Sigma, with whoever you were affiliated with, and you'd start doing your own coverage, and that was kind of why you were with an agency in the first place. One, you wanted the freedom to pursue whatever you wanted to pursue, but number two was you didn't want somebody in New York telling you, "Oh, this is how we want you to do this, and we want you standing at this street corner to photograph the motorcade as it came by," or something like that. There are always those kind of assignments that were just like coverage assignments, which nobody who had the capability or a good agency, they wouldn't be really interested in those assignments anyways. That was just about the day rate, and you'd get your day rate, and you wouldn't have any pictures to show from it. More likely than not, you wouldn't have any pictures to show from it. So if you're with Contact, you create your own coverage, you get your own access, and your agency would make sure that you
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 got
got
paid.
some ink somewhere.
Hmm.
And what Contact was really good at, so the news magazines would close on Friday night. Their hard close would be like late Friday night or early Saturday morning, but they would basically be wrapped up by Friday around 5 or 6 in the afternoon for the most part. There'd still be a few pages open, but they'd be pretty much wrapped up. So Contact's philosophy and what they did very successfully is, so most of the agency photographers, the magazine photographers on contract or working under assignment specifically for Time, um, they would shoot E6 film, and because E6 film could be processed in a couple of hours, and so Contact was the first. They billed themselves as the first color news agency. So they concentrated on producing excellent color. Um, one of their focuses was producing excellent color. So Contact photographers would typically they'd shoot slower E6 film. They would shoot Kodachrome. Kodachrome took 24 hours to process.
Hmm.
So, but
And the concept was that those were higher quality. Yeah.
yeah, the quality is what they were going for, the quality of the actual color. So if you were, say you're photographing the president, and we say photographing, we say photographing the Pope. We don't say shooting the Pope, because that could, lead to all
Yeah.
sorts of trouble. But so you're
Yeah.
photographing the Pope, and the news magazines, Time, Newsweek, they'd already have seen their the E6 coverage from their contract photographers and everybody else. Um, we were 24 hours behind the curve because we were shooting Kodachrome. So Robert Pledge, the co-founded Contact with David Burnett, he would go in Friday night as the magazines were closing, and he was a very good salesman, in the you know he'd talk, he'd have drinks, and he would show Contact's work. And so what would happen was they might have one of their photographers, an image laid out, double page spread, whatever, and Contact would have a similar image that would be of higher quality, or they'd have a better
Mhm.
image overall. And so he would basically license an image to knock out that other image that was already in place. And it would frustrate a lot of other photographers because their editor would give them a call Friday afternoon. Oh, you got a double page in the magazine, and Friday night that it would be gone,
Mhm.
because contact would have trumped them. And so that's basically how contact
Always
survived.
up.
That's how they operate.
Mhm.
It was part of their philosophy. They didn't want to be first, they wanted to be best. um, and so it leads to a lot of lessons. You learn very quickly that you never took anybody's word on the fact that you were going to have a picture in the magazine that week until you saw it with your own eyes. um,
Mhm.
you just didn't want to get happy just to be crushed later on.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great to get in the inner workings of how contact operated and everything, and just the general idea that at this time that it was a lot of handshake agreements, oral agreements, and you could just basically hop from one place to the next as assignments rolled in or as events occurred. I mean, that was the whole deal with going to photograph the Pope, something that happened with the Pope. And so that's why in McNally was nearby, and so that's why he just hopped on Peter Jennings' jet or whatever it was. So that's and you could just do that and know that you weren't gonna be in trouble for leaving wherever you were, and that it was gonna be worth your while for putting in that effort as well. So I mean, it created a great incentive for journalists out there to go and really work the stories that they thought were the most important and to not hesitate.
Yeah, that's how the typical French style agency photographer would work. um, they were rarely on assignment when things started, but they would still make a living.
Yeah, for sure. So going through Rick Smolin, one of the things that he mentioned that kind of sort of going through and pulling out some tips and ideas that I think could be useful for photographers. He mentioned that one of the best skills that a photographer has to have is to just work like a dog and never take no for an answer. And he has this great story of the first time that he met John Loengard. He wanted to work on this day in the life issue of Life magazine, I believe, right?
Life, yeah.
And he comes in the building, and the receptionist basically tells him leave. So he's crushed, and then he goes outside and he sees some like painters or something, and he goes in the back door and manages to get his way up, get up to the Lowengar's actual office, and now there's another receptionist blocking him and getting mad at him and basically telling him to get out of there. And he just happened to meet Gray Vallette, and Gray Vallette says, "Oh, hey, you're a photographer." Sees his pictures, says, "Okay, I'll get you a meeting with Loengard if you can wait a few hours." And he waits and goes in, talks to Loengard, and at this point, he's already been told no like 5 times, in the same day,
Right.
by every different low level person there. Then Loengard tells him, "No, we already hired all the photographers we need. We don't need you. We're not, your work is good, and maybe I'll consider, whatever, but no, you're not going to be on the day in the life project." And then he persists. He didn't take no for an answer, and he kept asking. He basically begged him, and he got the gig. So I mean, that was such a great story, and just a sense of, I mean, I always try to tell people about this. I always say like you got to go knock on doors or sleep on people's porches or whatever, like a dog, and don't take no for an answer. But this is how it actually can work. I mean, this is a point blank example of how it worked in his case. And how to do it. You know, not just think about doing it, but actually don't take no for an answer.
Yeah, well, once again, that was so typical. It's not. I mean, it's a great story, but it's a typical story about the guys who and the gals who made it as photographers. None of them took no for an answer. I always make the joke, if you need a press pass, then you probably don't deserve a press pass unless you're going to the White House or something. I mean, you
Yeah.
have to be able to get in and you have to be able to operate, regardless of who says you can be there or not. You know, the thing about the Time Life building, so they had the receptionist was downstairs, and you'd have to go to the receptionist, and the receptionist would call up the person that you had a meeting with, and then they'd write you a pass, and there was a different color pass for every day of the week. And then you'd go to the elevator, and there'd be a guard at the elevator, and there were different banks, so you had different sections of floors from each elevator bank, and you'd go to the right elevator bank, and then they would let you up to that floor. Now, so the first time you go there, say you get a red pass, and then the next time you get a green pass, and so pretty soon you've got every color in the rainbow that you need.
I see where this is going.
Right. And so I never even had and then the other part of that is they didn't put locks on the doors on the floor of each, in the lobby area of each floor. If you're going to Time Pictures, there are glass doors there. They weren't locked. That they didn't put those locks on those doors until probably like the early 90s. And so once you were in the building, you could go to any floor you wanted. You'd go to you'd never go back downstairs, but you'd go to the floor where you could cross over to the next elevator bank so you could get up to wherever you needed to go. And where the Sports Illustrated photo department was, where the Fortune photo department was, and who you could have an excuse to run into it on these floors. And so,
Mhm.
like I said, even when I was under contract with Time, I never even had a building pass. And then at some point, you're making friends with the guy at the elevator, and so he doesn't stop you anyways.
Mhm.
Um, so if you got a building pass to go up and see a certain editor at Sports Illustrated, then the plan of the day was to see 5 or 6 other editors at 4 or 5 different magazines. And then if you were there in the morning, hopefully somebody would invite you to lunch, so you get lunch out of the deal. But you'd run into people in the hallway. You'd make sure you went up to the photographer's floor and see if you could run into Izzy, or just stop by and see Mel at the photo locker and just say hi. It was once you got into the building, you worked the entire building, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, and in a way, like that's a great story for just a microcosm of what photojournalists do everywhere they go. I mean, not just how to operate in the Time building, but in all buildings and in all types of stadiums and all types of environments. How to get in and out of airports and things like this. I mean, the stories, like you mentioned last time about bringing a couple of bottles of scotch with you when you're going to Iran, or yeah, you were going to Iran, or was it Pakistan? It was Pakistan.
I was in
And
Afghanistan, but it's all
oh,
this. It's
geez.
all. It's
Whoops! Not all those countries are the same, but
so the first time, well, the only time I went to Iran, I was 15 years old, and I don't know if this is and the revolution was just kicking off, and it was like August of '78. So the revolution happened like January '79, and I don't know why these things happen, but when you're speaking of scotch and access and working the room and all that kind of stuff, for
yeah,
some reason, as we went from hotel to hotel, I was on the Junior Olympics wrestling team, the last wrestling team that went to Iran to compete. And so I was the youngest guy on the squad, because I actually wasn't qualified, but I turned 15 in time to go. But I'd qualified as a 14-year-old, but you had to be 15. But anyway, so I was the youngest guy. But my job, for whatever reason, became the guy who would have to go down at 10 o'clock at night and find somebody that I could bribe with our pooled money to get a bottle of Russian vodka from somebody somewhere in the hotel. So this is not, I guess
these are life skills. They're not
these
just
are life
photography
skills.
skills.
Yes.
Yeah. But it
how to negotiate, how to make friends, how to get into places and get things and access that you normally shouldn't have.
Yeah. It goes right along with that, the art of hanging out that we've talked about before. Like you said, eventually the elevator guy knows you. You know, you've had enough small conversations with him over time, 1 or 2 minute interactions as you ride the elevator over time, that eventually they become your friend, and you walk up and it's like, hey, what's up? So yeah, that's great. Those are, I mean, that's the kind of thing with this podcast I think we really want to get people to understand, is that you can talk about ISOs and pixels and cameras and this kind of stuff, but if you don't have the skill and the ability to get yourself to access, to get in the room, to get on the plane or wherever it is, then you know all the technical skills in the world aren't going to save you.
Like, once again, it's not an atypical skill that these photojournalists have. They all have it. It's frightening. I think I
Hmm.
told you before about how I was hanging out with Alan Tannenbaum, and I was a young kid, and we are on Mackinac Island, which is a which they have Mackinac Island. They have a big Democrat event each summer, and all the presidential candidates go there. And it's an island with no cars on it, and there's a famous Grand Hotel, I think it's called, and so this is my first trip there, and I didn't know what I was doing, but so anyways, so I'm hanging out with Alan. I didn't really know him at the time. I think it was the first time I met him. And they have a buffet set up for everybody and so we're walking up to the buffet and I get in line and Alan goes, you're a photojournalist. There's no lines. And he walks
Yeah.
up to the front of the line, he grabs a plate and goes on the other side of the buffet table and just like goes right down the line. And so of course other people follow him at that point, including me. And now there's two lines going through the buffet instead of one. But
Yeah.
it's such a I, they had this thing, the NPPA, National Press Photographers Association, had this thing 20, 30 years ago, and it was a big deal. It was called the Flying Short Course. And they would do like 5 or 6 locations around the country and fly in, and they'd travel as a group. And it was a 1 day event where if you were a kid in Omaha, you might drive to Kansas City or Minneapolis to catch the Flying Short Course. And
Hmm.
they'd have 7 or 8 great photographers and great editors who you'd never get the chance to see or talk to or whatever. And it was a big event. And one year, Rudy Fry, who was a contract photographer for Time Magazine, and I heard this story from Don Dahl, who was a National Geographic photographer, and he was on the short course that year. And Father Don Dahl was a professor at Creighton University, so I knew him. I audited his class. I got into be a member of his class at Creighton, even though I didn't go to Creighton. Um, and he told me the story how they walked on a plane, and Rudy schmoozed everybody as this whole group of say 20, 25 people are walking on the plane, and he schmoozed the person at the the front door, the person in the airplane. They went in and they took their seats, and right before the plane took off, somebody came in and the poor person was freaked out because they realized that there were 25 people on the plane that they'd never gathered their boarding passes. He was just so good at talking and schmoozing people that they
Wow.
overlooked the basics of getting the boarding pass. And then boarding pass is kind of important because you have to have a, a flight manifest that shows everybody on the plane. So I mean, they were in violation of FAA rules at that point just because this guy was such a good talker.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, so that really hits, drills that idea home of that. sometimes maybe trying to work on those social skills and things like that may be more important even than practicing shooting with slow shutter speeds or whatever, so whatever practice you're doing with your camera in your hand, just every social interaction that you have, you can use as a learning experience of how to in the future schmooze your way into a situation.
Yeah, and I should point out that I'm not great at this. That's not one of
Yeah,
my like
right.
great skills. Other people are like magicians. They're like the Albert Einstein of talking to people. I'm pretty awkward, and I kind of rise to the occasion when I need to.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we're talking about like people like Rick Smolin in this case, or like a Bill Pierce or David Burnett, or some of these people that have been on the podcast that are like Michael Jordan level of schmoozing and getting their way into situations. So you're probably up there, but you're not Michael Jordan level.
No,
But
well,
you're up there. You're playing in the NBA, whereas you seem like a magician to me. Whenever I see you get in and out of situations, and so and I'm probably like a collegiate level, or something like that compared to you. So I mean, there's different skills, but it's something that you do get better at too. I mean, I've gotten better at it over time. I think it's true that it's probably one of those things that you can't work on that much. It's not like you can go out and like shooting free throws. You can just do it all day and to get good at it. But if you don't even realize how important it is in the first place, then I don't think you'll ever be that good at it.
so that's the thing, as a young photojournalist, um, you learn from everybody. And so one of the guys I learned from, Rudy Smith just passed away like 2 weeks ago. And Rudy Smith was really a great photographer. And he was a photographer with the Omaha World Herald. And he was a black guy. He graduated from UNO, University of Nebraska at Omaha. And he was the first black journalist that the World Herald ever hired. I think it was in 1964 or something. And Rudy didn't really start out as a photographer. I think he was working as a copy boy or something. It was just the lowest level. But he wanted to be a photographer. He taught himself to be a photographer. And Rudy was very generous with sharing information. And we're sitting in the dark room one day, and he's telling me the story how he was a photographer, and in the riots in 1968, he was in North Omaha, and Rudy was a guy who knew everybody in town. He couldn't go someplace without being recognized. But at this point, he was still kind of young. He was probably like 22 years old. And a National Guardsman grabbed him around the collar, and he said, I'm going to take you behind this building. I'm going to put a bullet in your head. And so Rudy is getting hauled. The guy's going to kill him.
Wow.
And Rudy sees, Mayor Vase, which was, one of the famous mayors of Omaha. And he's like, "Hey, Mayor, how you doing?" He sees him like halfway down the block. And the mayor's like, "Hey, Rudy, come over here." And it saves his life, just that having that relationship and keeping his head, by keeping his thought process and not going, freaking out, probably saved his life that day. Um,
Yeah.
but his social skills also, something that, he might have made friends with the mayor, thinking he might have to have access to him in his office one day.
Hmm.
He never thought that relationship would save his life, but it did.
Yeah. And it's probably a relationship that he built up 2 minutes at a time, 1 minute at a time, over a period of time, where you see him at multiple events and you slowly build up this relationship as being just a nice guy that's easy to talk to, and it ended up saving his life. That's an amazing story. And that also kind of is a nice segue into something that Rick Smolin was talking about. He was talking about, we worked hard and we worked like dogs and we never took no for an answer and all of that kind of stuff. But he said also there was a lot of luck. And you can even just see in his two stories I've talked about so far, he randomly bumps into David Burnett, gets into contact press images. Randomly, Gray Vallette comes through the office and gets him in to see John Lowengard. And he said that there's been several times, like he talks about the book project that he was working on, a day in the life book project, and he said that, you know, there's times where things are about to completely tank and everything is gonna basically go to shit, and you're desperate and you're thinking this is like I'm on my last leg or whatever, whatever cliche you want to use, and then something happens and, you know, you're saved, or you know, in this case Rudy was saved by just talking to the mayor. In Rick's case, you know, they redesigned, relaid out the entire book on press, you know, while it was on press, which is just unthinkable. And then because of that book, he ended up publishing later hundreds of books. So if that one book had turned out like shit, his whole career might have, you know, his whole book publishing career could have been over right there. So I wanted to ask you about, you know, this whole idea of, you know, kind of being on your last leg, kind of thinking that, wow, if an assignment doesn't come my way, or if a job doesn't come my way, or if I don't get a picture in a magazine soon, you know, I'm gonna have to sell a lens or sell a camera, or the desperation. And then yet somehow it always seems to work out. It always seems that in the end, a job comes or something comes in and saves you at the last minute. That's what Rick said. What's your take on that?
I think I think Rick is being humble when he says it's luck, and I don't. And that luck, for lack of a better word, is something that every successful photojournalist I know has always. I don't want to say they relied on it, but it's always been there when they needed it, and I think it's because they're smart. They're they're street smart. They're great observers, and they have so you know, when I was young, I couldn't figure out why I wasn't getting assignments, and I was very frustrated. When I'm still a young kid. I went to Frank, who's contact press images photographer. And I'm like, Frank, I'm like, I don't know. I'm working so hard. I don't know why I'm not getting any breaks. And he's like, Ken, it's not about, you got to work. You got to work as hard as you can, but you also got to work as smart as you can. And so that working smart and working hard, that combination, as hard as you can. And then on top of that, keeping your cool, not freaking out when it looks like everything's going sideways on you.
Yeah.
Those are the things. That's kind of what brings that luck about. And I don't, you know, we can call it luck, and we use that word all the time because we don't want to like say, you know, I knew that was going to happen, because that might like keep it from happening as well. But it's a common thing. I can tell you stories about any one of these photographers. I mean, Joe McNally. Joe's probably one of the most successful photojournalists in the history of the medium, and he was talking about, you know, this was lucky and that was lucky, and luckily this guy called me,
Mm-hmm.
and it was such, you know, I don't think it's really luck. I don't know what you call it, but it's you know, people say you make your own luck. Uh, I don't know. Maybe we just don't hear about the people who never got that luck. I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
that's it.
And I think Rick was also mentioning about sort of like this inflection point where you could take one path and it just completely changes everything. You know, and he talked about the girl in Australia that he met that was going to go, and he ended up getting a gig from National Geographic to go photograph her crossing the desert, or whatever case maybe, or on press. And that one thing that he did took him down a completely different path than it otherwise would have. And I just think, what do you have any examples of that in your history where you've been sort of like on the precipice of this big decision, and maybe, you know, sometimes you think it's not working out, or things are, I'm on my last leg, you know, if things don't change soon, I'm gonna have to go back to Omaha and become a corn farmer, and then something ultimately broke through, and it worked out, and the day was saved, as they say.
No, I probably have 100 of those stories. I probably have more that I don't even remember of taking one path and not taking the other. But probably
Yeah.
my most clear memory of that was it was during Iran Contra, whenever that was. So say like 87, 80, let's say it's 87, right?
Yeah.
And I've I've spent I've been with Contact for about 2 years. I've spent I sold my car in Omaha to go to New York and Washington D.C. That money's all gone. I remember my my aunt Helen sent me a check for $100 once, and that got me like another 2 or 3 weeks down the road. That's how life was. It was like, that was New York City in the 80s, and I didn't have a place to stay on a regular basis. A lot of times I didn't know where I was going to be sleeping that night. I had one suitcase, I had a camera bag, that was it. Um, and so I was photographing Ollie North, and he was like a central figure in the Iran Contra hearings. And I would go to Ollie's house like on the weekends, just hang out, wait for him to mow the lawn or something, take pictures of him mowing the lawn. And so it's kind of a long story. I
No, this
apologize
is a
for that.
good. This is the one really great story. So
So so I was there one weekend, and there was another photographer there who I kind of knew, and I know him well today, but at that point we just kind of knew him by seeing him around. And he had some connection to Ollie, and so he had some type of special access that was going to happen. And so I had been photographing. I had this body of work, and I went to like his daughter's graduation from high school, everything. I mean, I was always hanging around.
this is that work like a dog
Right,
approach. You're
right.
desperate. You got $100 from your aunt, or else you're gonna have to come back to Omaha. And so you're working on the weekends, just stalking Holly North and his family,
Yeah, I mean,
going
basically,
to the high school graduation and everything. There was a weird
basically.
guy. There was a weird 15-year-old with the camera,
No,
at my
I was like
graduation today.
20 at the time, but I wasn't. I mean, I was still weird, but I was a little bit older. I mean, I was old enough. I remember I rented a car, so I was like 20, 21. I still had to pay like the extra insurance because I wasn't 25 to rent a car. But so, anyways, I was there, and this other photographer showed up. He's like, Ken, I need you to do me a favor. I need to have some exclusives here. And I'm like, well, I'm here to shoot too. I'm not going to like not shoot. And so he's like, and this is like, this is, I think we had to like, I don't know if he had a phone in his car or what. I mean, this is like it's like before even bag phones. It's like, I don't know. But so he's like, I'm on assignment for Life magazine, and Ollie's going to come out here and do a family photo with me. And I can't have you shoot that same picture, or else it won't be an exclusive for Life magazine. And so I'm like, well, I'm here. I'm going to shoot it. And so he calls his editor at Life magazine, who's David Friend, who's now he's like visual coordinator of all of Condé Nast. But at that point, he's like a photo editor at Life magazine. And David actually gets on the shuttle. He's in New York, and he comes down to Virginia to like talk to me. And so meanwhile, I get on the phone and call up my agent, Bob Pledge, and I'm like, what am I going to do here? They're really putting they say I'll never work for Life magazine, and this will ruin my career, right, if I don't give them this exclusive. And Bob's like, you shoot everything that he shoots. You shoot every single frame that he shoots. And I say, Bob, I only got 2 rolls of film, and the whole weekend, and it was like Memorial Day, so it was like a 3-day weekend. And he said, just shoot one frame of every situation. So I did, and I mean, they put a lot of pressure on me to have me, and there was one situation I didn't shoot, and the only reason I didn't shoot it because all I had was a single roll of Kodachrome 25 at that point, and it was Ollie North with his family in a Roy Rogers, and I didn't have enough light inside the Roy Rogers to actually make a frame, so I gave them that exclusive. So after that weekend, I went back to Paul Giroux's house, which I was sleeping on his floor, and it wasn't a house; it was a 1-bedroom apartment. And I literally got down on my knees and I prayed because I had nothing. I was out of film. I had no place to stay. I just burned a bridge with not only probably Life, but every magazine in the Time Life building. That's what I thought at the time. And there was this job opening at the Quad City Times or whatever it is in Iowa, just like a small, tiny newspaper. I'm like, maybe I can just go back to Iowa. That was my choice. I could go back to Iowa and try to get that job, go back to Nebraska, Iowa, whatever. Or I could just give up and become a real estate salesman, which is what my parents wanted me to do. And at the same time, I was about 30 grand in the hole, because how Contact worked is they'd kind of front you money as you needed it to complete your work. And so you had this card where my card was basically, you had an expense card and a fees card. My fees card was at 0, and my expense card was about a negative $30,000,
Wow.
which was a lot of money. And so then I got a phone call, so like Tuesday or Wednesday of that week, and Bob was like, and for some reason, Ollie North had just blown up that week, and everybody was suddenly interested in this guy who I'd been like stalking for several months. And so I had this huge body of work. And so the deal that Contact made, Bob made, he sold, so anything that Life magazine wanted as an exclusive that I'd also shot, we agreed not to sell those. And for that, Life magazine paid us like 20 grand, something ridiculous, 25 grand, a lot of money. To protect their exclusive, we got paid for not licensing the images that they were going to use. And then
That's awesome.
and that pretty much got me even. And then the next day, Newsweek got exclusive rights they got second choice of everything, and they paid like 8 or 10 grand for that. And so anything that Life didn't pick, Newsweek could publish. And then at the same day, People magazine got the third pick. So they paid like 4 or 5 grand for the third pick. So now all of a sudden I went from being negative 30 grand to say like being 10 grand in positive, just like in
Wow.
3 days. And that's
Yeah.
before. And so now, so you have Life magazine doing a major story, you have Newsweek doing a cover story, and you have People magazine doing a story, which the US publications kind of set the tone for the rest of the world's publications, at least when it had something to do with US politics. And so then I made this body of work was licensed in 30 different countries and 30 different magazines. So I was going to go back to the Midwest and call it a day, or somehow I got lucky, if you want to call it luck.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it wasn't luck that you showed up at Ollie North's door, month and on the weekends and on every spare day that you had, and got all the. You did a huge body of work before that day even happened. But certainly that when you showed up and there was this other photographer there, and then Bob is telling you, "Hey, shoot every picture the same," and you're thinking, I'm only going to get one picture. You're not really getting like what the point of it is. You're just basically trying to bust their exclusive. And then later it's like, oh, Life is actually going to have to pay twice for those pictures. They're going to have to pay the other photographer, and then they're going to have to pay you to not publish yours anywhere so that their story keeps exclusive. So it's such a smart strategy, and all you needed was one image of each setup or each thing, and you would get that huge payday out of it. So that was kind of like hitting the lottery when that other photographer showed up and this whole thing went down.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, I mean, I know I made more money than he did, probably even from. I mean, I made more money from Life magazine than
Yeah.
he did.
Yeah, because that was probably just a day rate and page, per page pay on his end. But yeah, your licensing that you got out of it was huge. So that's really an amazing story. That was the one I was looking for. You told me that story a few times before, I think, and yeah, I think it was funny that just the visual of like having a bag phone or having to go. Hold on, let me go run to a payphone, and you're calling Bob and you're scared shitless. Like, I'm never gonna work for time. I'm never gonna work for life. I'm never gonna be allowed in the building again. And he's like, "Don't worry about it. It's gonna be all right. Just shoot one picture of every setup." I mean, how amazing. I mean, it's hard to. I mean, you were young at that time. It's hard to think what would have happened if you didn't have Bob in your corner at that point. You might have got scared and turned away. I mean, sounded like you put up a good enough fight initially that I thought one time I think you might have said that they actually called Bob from their car phone or whatever, and we're like, and he talked to them and talked it over with them or something, and then he's like, put Ken on the phone, and then he's like, tell him to
No,
shoot each.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's what happened. I didn't have a car phone. I didn't have a bag phone. I couldn't leave at that point to go to a pay phone. Now I was stuck there. That's another thing Bob said.
yeah.
He said, you don't leave until he leaves. And so, yeah, they got Bob on the phone. They were negotiating with Bob to try to get me to back off. And so, and then they said, okay, Bob wants to talk to you. And Bob said, can they hear you? And I said, no. He said, well, you shoot every frame that guy shoots. And he even said, now that you bring that up, I had like 3 cameras, but I only had 2 rolls of film. And he said, shoot with that 3rd camera, like you got film in it. So,
Wow. That's hilarious. Don't show him that he doesn't have any film left. Yeah, don't let him know how much film you have left. I mean, that's just an amazing story. I mean, you're down to like your last roll of film. I mean, that's when you think of it. I mean, you were getting a pretty desperate time sleeping on Paul Giroux's floor, and then for this, for all your hard work to pay off. And that's what I always kind of tell myself whenever bookings are not coming in as much as I want and things like that. It's like just keep putting in those hard work, all the hard work you can put in on weekends, and it will eventually pay off. And maybe you're not going to. I mean, you would have probably, with that Ollie North scandal popping up, you would have probably still been paid whatever 10 or 15 grand or whatever for the body of work that you had already shot. But that extra 25 on top was basically like just that was luck. It was luck that other shoot had happened, and and then you handling it the way you did, that wasn't luck. But having that other photographer appear out of nowhere one day when you've been on this beat for months and there's never been any action, all of a sudden there's interest. That was like, oh, all of a sudden I hit the lottery that day. So that's an amazing story. So I think we're about out of time. I wanted to share a book. Smolin talked a lot about books. He's a publisher. He published a lot of books. And he specifically mentioned the Masters of Contemporary Photography series.
oh, right. Yeah, that's good.
Right.
Yeah.
And so he specifically mentioned this one. It's his father-in-law,
Yep.
Elliot Erwitt. So
Yep.
this one is really great. This is an old one that I've had, and I always like to just show people, like, I picked this up at a used bookstore. It has the price written right here, $2.98. All right. So, and with these, they don't have to be pristine copies. You don't need a perfect copy of this. It's got tons of information in it, though. I mean, tons of great stuff, and they make them. The history of them, but I got the Bert Stern one here. There's one that we've already talked about on a previous episode with Annie Leibovitz and Mary Ellen Mark.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them, and they're cheap. On Amazon, you can probably find them for like, I mean, this one in a used bookstore, hard copy, $3. So I think, you know, there should be no shortage of books for photographers out there to look up and read.
There's so much knowledge, and it's so, like you said, it's so readily available. It's so cheap, and it's so valuable, and it doesn't
Yeah.
have anything to do with pixels or exposure or anything else. Really, it's all about the thinking behind the photography. At least with those books, for the most part.
Absolutely. And I mean, and especially like with some of this older stuff like Elliot Erwitt and even this Bert Stern stuff, if you're in a more on the fashion side or commercial side of things, or if you're more of a Magnum photojournalist side of things, there's tons of insights in there. And one thing that actually I take away from all those is that they did it all with way inferior equipment. You know, so we want to debate today, Sony, Nikon, Canon, whatever, or this lens, you know, is it $1,000 lens or a $1,200 lens? They're all 10 times better than what Elliot Erwitt was working with, or what these previous photographers were working with, Bert Stern and all these people that we talked about throughout history. So in a way, it actually hits home that point of that the technical side of it really isn't that important. That's what that comes and goes. That's going to just, you know, always evolve. But the skill of shooting, I mean, this book in particular, he tells a lot of stories of how he got into situation, and so that's where the real important stuff is.
Yeah, I always use the analogy is, you got to have, as a photographer, you got to get in the room. You got to have a place to stand. You got a place to stand, then you got the chance to make a picture. If you can't even get in the room, then you've got no chance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, first is getting in the room, then having a vision and being able to see, you know.
right.
And then after that, it's like, yeah, I can operate the camera. So, and I
Yeah,
have a good enough
the great
piece of
story.
film.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about with David Burnett. He shares a story of getting in the room with Ayatollah Khomeini. Speaking of Iran, you know, that was
Mhm.
back in '79. He got in the room. Nobody else
Exactly.
did.
Exactly. I mean, how difficult. And so, yeah,
But
tons of great lessons in these podcasts. I mean, and you're putting out this information and making it readily available. There's these books that we're sharing with people here that are very cheap and readily available. So there's really no excuse out there.
no, absolutely. So, thank you. We'll put some links to those that series there.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, thank you, man. Thanks for sharing those stories. Those
sure.
are some amazing stories today.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon next week.
All right.
Okay,
All right.
thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.